just going to move right into it so we can be respectful of everybody's time. And I know everybody needs a break and wants to talk, but let's keep it a little quiet while we introduce the next panelists. So our next panel is legal. Guys, if you can, yeah, thank you. Our next panel is legal. And we often say that, legal is the last panel of the day, but legal should often be the very first thing that you think about, truly. So we're going to get into it here. And let me introduce everyone real quick. Our moderator today is Angela Lee. Angela is the legal director. Angela is the legal director for Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. She provides pro bono legal assistance to low-income artists and small-budget nonprofits in arts-related and poverty law issues. Anything I'm leaving out there, Angela?
No,
yeah.
It's a great segue.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela. Awesome. We've got Jake Davidowitz, founder of Jake Davidowitz PLLC, which is a boutique music and entertainment law firm and attorney who previously served as Associate Director, Business and Legal Affairs for Universal Music Group's East Coast labels. And finally, this guy, everyone should know, when we talk about the history of Austin music, and Mike's going to hate this because he's a very humble man, but I'm going to do it anyway. Mike Tollison founded and has been the director of the Entertainment Law Institute since 1990. Mike was the co-founder of the legendary Austin concert venue Armadillo World Headquarters. Let's give a round of applause for the Armadillo. Mike was also a co-founder of Austin Public Access Channel, ACTV, and co-producer of the first Willie Nelson 4th of July picnic in 1973. In 1973, as a consultant to KLRU TV, he brought Willie Nelson and KLRU together for the pilot episode. So when we think about that first episode of KLRU, or Austin City Limits with Willie, that was all Mike. Now the longest running music program on television. He's responsible for creation of the Texas Music Office and founded Mike Tollison and Associates Entertainment Law. Let's give it up for Mr. Mike here. Yeah, awesome. And we're just going to roll right in. You got the questions, Angela? Or do you want to? Well, we're just going to get started. I will once again just ask everybody to respect our panel here and shut the fuck up. So we can listen to this important information. We will have plenty of time for networking afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us and for being such great advocates for the community. So speaking of unsexy and boring, we are lawyers, but we promise we will try to bring the drama because we're going to talk about things that can go wrong and why you need lawyers, ideally before things go wrong. So Patrick mentioned a little bit about how I work for Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts. We are the only legal services organization that specifically provides pro bono services to artists in Texas, and we're one of the oldest organizations of our kind. We started in 1979. I have been involved with TELA since about 2003. So I am the one who actually hooks up all the artists and the lawyers. So I see everything that comes through. And so we kind of selected a smattering of the things that we see most often, and we have a great panel to address those issues. Firstly, we are going to try to address band agreements a little bit and producer agreements, why you need them, what are they, and what can go wrong. And after that, label deals. And I will be around after. I don't know if our panelists will, to answer questions if you need them, to ask them. And we'll roll right into it. So as an intro, when in a musician's career do you think an attorney becomes necessary, or is it advisable to have an attorney?
Yeah, so hey again, my name is Jake. I would say that, it really depends on what's coming up, but like things that I know that could come up that would definitely signal you need an attorney. If there's like any big agreement, like if a manager comes to you with an agreement, or if they just come to you and they say, I would like to manage you and we can figure out like some deal terms, I would say that's a good time to talk to a lawyer. You want somebody on your side who knows what those deals look like, who can help you negotiate it, makes sure that what they're saying makes sense, might have some other ideas to, further protect you. Like, for instance, if a manager comes to you and they say, I want to get, 15% of gross, then maybe that's normal, but you might want to say, okay, well, how long is this going to go for? What's the term of the agreement? And then a good lawyer can tell you, like, you might want to negotiate something called a sunset clause. So, that the manager might not be getting a percentage for perpetuity. You can put a bit of an end to it. So that's definitely an instance that I think an artist should be looking at hiring an attorney. If you're going to do a deal with a publisher, then definitely at that point, if you're going to do a deal with a label, and then other things like maybe entity formation if you're going to make an LLC. And then, sometimes it's just totally different. Like, I've had smaller artists come to me saying, I wrote this song and I had a guitarist who was on my track with me, and we have like since severed the relationship, and now he's saying that he wrote part of the song and he wants to be paid a session fee that we never agreed on, and he wants part of the publishing. So, if something like that comes up and they're threatening that they're gonna sue or hire their own attorney, then that could be something that could maybe lead you to an attorney much earlier than you thought.
All right, let me jump in here and let's see what I can add to that. Excuse my cap here, but those lights are just really bright. One thing I could add to that is that the best time to see a lawyer and talk to a lawyer about your music business is before you sign the contract. We see a surprising number of situations where people come in with a contract that they've already signed and want to know what they signed and what they did to themselves. So my best advice is talk to a lawyer before you sign the contract. And certainly, a lot of people have learned a lot about the music business, and they feel like they are able to read the contracts and know what they're doing. But lawyers are tricky, sneaky. There's a lot of stuff in those contracts that you might not recognize right off. When you read it, it may look pretty simple and pretty innocent, but there's some language in there that's going to do some things to you that you may not catch if you're not a lawyer familiar with the music business. And so one thing you want to do is be as knowledgeable and educated as you can be before you talk to a lawyer, particularly so that you can utilize their time in an efficient manner. So if you have, and there's so much material now, there's so many books, there's so much information available on the internet, with the Texas Music Office, for example. There's so many good books, and you can self-educate just by reading those books until you feel like you really have a pretty good grasp of how the music business works with regard to what you're doing. And then what you can do when you find a lawyer to talk to is you can ask some intelligent questions. You can save a lot of time by being up to speed with regard to terminology and how things work. So that's what I encourage, is that you get as educated as you can be on your own. Then find a lawyer to make a friend. I mean, I don't think you have to wait until you have a deal in hand. If you can identify a lawyer that you think you want to work with, most of the entertainment lawyers I know would be responsive to you if you just simply find a way to make contact, say who you are, introduce yourself, and establish a relationship. So that whenever you do have that contract to look at, you've already got that established. So go ahead and start thinking about who you might want to work with. And then, as Jake said, you certainly want to use a lawyer to review any contracts that you're about to sign, and they're going to come up in the form of publishing deals, management deals, things related to copyright, because the copyright law underlies all the entertainment business. And so it's going to touch everything you do if you're creating original material. And so you're going to need to be familiar with that, or you're going to need to know a lawyer that can advise you about copyright, regardless of where you are in your career if you're creating original work.
So I'm actually going to say, have a much more general answer based on what I've seen. I think that every musician could use an attorney if they are collaborating with anyone, and if you think there will ever be money involved. Based on what I've seen, you just kind of never know what can happen, and legal services are actually not as scary to get, use, or pay for as people think. There are so many resources, and we'll try to cover that a little bit at the end. But one of the interesting phenomena, so as entertainment lawyers, our job ideally is transactional, right? We drop contracts, everyone signs it, everyone's happy. We basically write down the things and memorialize what everyone has agreed upon. The reality is what we see is a bunch of disagreements because people have neglected to write something down or don't agree on what they had shaken hands over before. One of the phenomena that I see at Tella is that after festival season, we get a whole bunch of band members, sometimes different band members from the same band, coming to us saying, I want to quit this band, however, I wrote all the songs, and they are continuing to perform them. Or, the band name is mine, but I want to leave the band, and they still want to use the band name. And so how can musicians prevent the fallout from these kinds of disagreements?
Yeah, so there is something called a band agreement that if you're in a band with people other than yourself, I highly recommend you get. You draft one, have an attorney draft it for you. You're going to really need to have this agreement, and you really want to get it at the beginning while everybody's getting along. I know it can feel like you are projecting some doom and gloom over the future of the band, talking about what happens if the band, no longer exists, but it's a much better time to talk about it while you all get along than when something's like exploded and nobody's getting along because everybody's going to go for each other's throat. So in these band agreements, you want to talk about things like what happens if the band terminates, who's going to control the name of the band. That's a huge one, and you kind of like see it all the time. Like I think of like my first concert ever was the Beach Boys, but it was only with Mike Love. And I think he might have been the only original guy there. And you go, how's he the Beach Boys right now? And either they had an agreement that it was written out that somehow he got to use that, or they didn't have an agreement. There was a big issue, and there was probably a fight about that. So you just want to get ahead of that. There are a lot of ways that you can deal with that issue. You can say if a majority of the original band is still together, they can use it. Or maybe there's one person who's really like the spearhead of the band, and the band is his, and he says, if we break up, the band name goes with me. Or in like a doom or gloom way, you could just say, if the band breaks up, then nobody is using the agreement. This is not even close to everything that's in one of these band agreements. It can talk about how you guys are going to split money from touring, and then who's going to get what percentage of publishing. Like there's so many ways to look at this, and so many issues that you really do want to, at the forefront of starting a band, make sure that everybody's on the same page of, and it could be a whole course to explain these agreements, but that's a good start, and I'm sure Mike has a lot to say.
Oh, okay. Before I move into that, I want to just say one more thing about the first topic, and that is I wanted to say that because we were getting so many requests in our office from musicians and people in the business that didn't really justify paying a lawyer or even charging a client for the time, so we created a entertainment and music legal clinic so that people can call into our office and set up an appointment for a 30-minute consultation at no charge. And so we started that a number of years ago as a way to sort of accommodate people that had simple questions or a quick question, something that we could address in 30 minutes. And so on Wednesday afternoons, we try to block out some time. And so if you go to our website, you'll see a way to sort of to sign up for that if you want a one-on-one with with me or Gwen Seal in my office. And so we started that. That's one thing, that one way we've been trying to help to musicians. Sorry? I'm sorry. What's the website? Oh, MikeTollison.com. But I wanted to say that. Also, I remembered what my friend Willie Nelson used to say about how to handle lawyers. He knew exactly what to do with lawyers. He said the first thing you do is you shoot all the lawyers. He grew up at a time whenever there weren't any entertainment lawyers around in Texas or anywhere else where he was, and so it was all handshake and verbal around in his day. Anyway, back to band deals. I can't avoid recommending to bands whenever they talk about working out an agreement amongst the members, I can't avoid recommending that they form an LLC, a limited liability company, because it's the same thing as a partnership agreement or a band agreement, call it whatever you want to. It's still a best vehicle for that, I think, is a LLC. And then within that company agreement, you can address all the things that Jake was talking about. If you don't do that, if two or more people are working together, collaborating on a business venture, if you're sharing revenue, if you are working together and as partners, you're going to be, and you may not think you're a partnership, but if there's two or more of you working together where you're out performing and sharing money, sharing expenses, you very likely could be deemed a partnership under Texas law, and that carries a number of liabilities and responsibilities. So I'm going to recommend that you do not want to just simply be a partnership as two or more people, because any one of you could create liabilities for the entire group. So there's a number of issues that go along with being a partnership. And so that's one of the main reasons why you want to form a written agreement, so that you address all of these issues and avoid and make your own determination as to how you want to deal with things like leaving members and sharing of revenue and record royalties and publishing royalties and ownership of these things. So you can do all of that in an LLC company agreement. And it may cost you a bit of money to get all that set up, but it's worth it, and it's not that expensive.
So I'm really glad you brought that up. That is actually one of the most common things that we do at Tala. And I know that it's very popular to go online and go to LegalZoom to form your business. The reason that's a bad idea, firstly, is that you can do what LegalZoom can do for you for free just by going to the Secretary of State's website and filling out the forms and submitting them to form an LLC. However, the part that Mike is actually talking about, it's not just forming an LLC. There's something called an operating agreement. That is the other necessary part of forming an LLC, and that's the part that will address band agreements and that an attorney might need to help you with, because that agreement needs to comply with Texas law and be enforceable under Texas law, which LegalZoom, isn't in Texas. So, do you have anything to add to that, Jake?
Yeah, I would. I would say when you're thinking about creating an LLC and you go the route of hiring a lawyer to do that, like, you guys are in the music industry, you should have a lawyer who knows the music industry, because while somebody might create a lot of LLCs, there's a lot of differences in the music industry. There's copyright involved. There's just things that if you're not an entertainment lawyer, you just wouldn't know, you wouldn't be thinking about. So don't maybe just go to some lawyer, the cheapest person you can get, because they do LLCs and that should be enough. Like, really go with somebody who knows the business that you're going to be in.
Yeah, you want to work with an entertainment lawyer because you're going to want a long-term relationship with that person anyway. And so by the time you finish working out all the terms of a company agreement, then you're going to have a pretty good working relationship with this individual, and he's going to be very familiar with your business and able to give you advice quickly and on short notice and going forward in the future. So it's a good idea to make sure that you're working with an entertainment lawyer when you set up that LLC or your band agreement.
So along the lines of things that might be specific to an operating agreement for a music-oriented business, can you talk about what a split sheet is?
Yeah, so a split sheet is generally when at least two people go in to write a song, and then you want to make sure that it is understood who wrote what percentage of the song. This is, when we were talking about syncs, it's going to be really useful because the songwriters have to be paid, and everybody is going to want to know who's getting paid the right amount. Then also, in these split sheets can sometimes, like, if an artist, let's say somebody signed to a big label, and then somebody is going to be writing for one of the songs on this artist's album, there might be certain language that's not in every split sheet that says, like, who's going to control if there needs to be an approval for a sync, like who has the right to approve or disapprove of that. And those are things that you might also want in a split sheet that I see all the time that aren't in that. And you might not, and some people don't want that in there. Like, it might be to your advantage to not have that language. But like, if you're an artist and you're just hiring somebody to write with you, it might be something that you'd be interested in. And that's just one of those things that it can be useful to have a music attorney who can kind of guide you there if you wouldn't come up with it yourself.
And so can you give us a real-world example of something that you saw, maybe when you were at a record label, of a band who had recently signed, something that may have happened, sorry to put you on the spot, because they didn't have these agreements in place beforehand?
Yeah, so prior to this, I was working in New York for Republic, Def Jam, and Island Records, and we would not even be able to release a song or an album if we didn't have like proper split sheets, and if you did release something and then somebody comes up and they go, hey, I actually wrote on that song, it can halt the entire release of an album, and it happened all the time. So, definitely as you move up, people are gonna make sure that you have these, or else your music is not going to get out.
And one thing we've seen at Tallow more than once is people who disagree on who wrote a song, so they rush to copyright it. Like, one person will seek to copyright it before the other person, and then it becomes a really, really big mess, because then you have a disputed copyright. We've seen it with trademark also. And so, Mike, aside from the split sheet, if someone came into your clinic and they gave you a band member agreement to look at, just scanning it, just looking at it briefly, what are the things that you would want to see, and what are the red flags?
We're talking about just a complete band agreement that covers everything?
Yes, or an operating agreement.
Well, as Jake already sort of outlined, you want to see who the members are of the company. You want to see who the managers are of the company. Managers in an LLC are the people that make the business decisions. Sometimes that's the entire band. All the band members may be equal. Sometimes maybe one or two or designated individuals are the managers of the company. That's something that is decided at the time that they set up the LLC. So you want to see who's got the authority to act on behalf of the band. If it's and so usually the agreement's going to address what they've done about publishing. So did they decide to that the company, the LLC, is going to own the publishing rights, and is it going to be a company publishing agreement? And then that's going to administer the songs? And then who has the authority to represent that entity? And sometimes bands decide to set up individual publishing companies and retain, so that each member retains ownership of their copyrights under their own publishing company. A lot of bands, of course, there's only one or two persons that are doing all the writing, and other members are not doing the writing. And so those individuals who are doing the writing, they often will want to set up their own publishing company outside the LLC. But then they will then have a deal with with the band LLC with regard to the use of those songs and mechanical licensing and things like that. So, it depends on what the issue is when they come in.
Okay, and so how does that change if you are not working with a band, but say a singer-songwriter who has collaborators? What do you recommend in those situations, like work-for-hire agreements, et cetera?
Yeah, I think if you guys don't know what a work-for-hire agreement is, I think they're really important, especially if you're going to be hiring people to be on your tracks and your album. So these agreements are basically, they might outline how much you're going to pay the guitar player, and then often it will say something like, you retain no ownership or rights in any of the underlying works that you're recording on for me. And this is really good. I gave the example of the artist who came to me who had a falling out with the guitar player who was now saying, I was supposed to get paid, I have rights in this. And if you have that signed agreement, then that can really nip that in the bud pretty much immediately. And it is super helpful. And as you get more established, and if you go to a label, they're going to want to see those because it ensures that people are not going to come out of the woodworks and make a claim on your music.
Well, I'll try to add something to that. If two or more people collaborate on to create a copyrightable work, such as a musical composition, then unless there's something in writing, they're going to be joint owners of that copyright. And so even in a recording situation, if you are working with other musicians in a recording studio, if you're working with a producer, if you've got a collection of people that are collaborating to create a creative work, there's going to be the question as to who's going to own the copyright in the work. And so if you, as the artist, are intending to own the copyright in the resulting work, then you're going to want to have a work-for-hire agreement with all the parties that worked on the collaboration process that created the work. So this language is, you'll see, and if you haven't already seen it in many contracts, it's there to make sure that the party that is intending to own the copyright is actually securing the right and having you, if you're a quote employee or if you're functioning as an independent contractor, this language will make sure that the copyright goes where it's intended as stated in the contract.
What if you are speaking about the distinction between an employee and a work-for-hire situation? What if you are a composer and you're hired by a company to compose something for a commercial?
Well, if you're hired by a company like an advertising agency to create a commercial, is that what you're thinking? There's going to be work-for-hire language in there because they're going to want to own that, maybe. If there's not, and I've seen a lot of employers, people in the position of actually paying for the work, paying for the artwork, or paying for a song, or paying for a video, and not have that work-for-hire language in there. And if they don't have it in there, if there's no assignment of the copyright from the creator to the person who's paying for it, then that copyright didn't transfer to that person who paid for it. They just got that one thing they paid for. They did not get the copyright to that work. That stayed with the creator. The only way that's going to transfer is in writing. Copyright does not move from one person to another except in writing.
So is that the case if you're an employee? Say you work for an ad agency.
If you're an employee, then if you're actually a true employee of a publishing company or an ad agency, and you're writing, or your assignment, your work, your scope of your work and the scope of your employment is to create something that is copyrightable, then the employer is going to own that work and is going to own the copyright in that work.
Do you have something to add to that, Jake?
No, not really, but I think maybe, because I think as we go into a few things, this might be helpful, and it's like copyright 101. It's just, so in music, we're generally talking about two different copyrights that can be owned. One is in the underlying composition, so if you wrote a song before it's even recorded, there is a copyright ownership in that like ethereal song. And then there's also a copyright in the sound recording. And the example that I always remember is like for Britney Spears' Hit Me Baby One More Time, that was written by Max Martin. So in theory, Max Martin or his company might own the copyright in the composition of Hit Me Baby One More Time. So if somebody else goes and covers that, he's still gonna get paid, but Britney Spears wouldn't because she likely doesn't have any claim to the copyright of the composition. She only, has probably an interest, or the record label only has an interest in maybe that version of Hit Me Baby One More Time, or whatever they own through their recording contract with Britney Spears. And then, so that's something that needs to be understood because it comes up in sync. It comes up when we're talking about record labels. That is generally that's the sound recording, and a publisher is going to be dealing with like the underlying composition. So that'll be helpful as we talk a little bit more.
Speaking of like Britney Spears, and many times you'll see the producer credited as the writer of a song. What about producer agreements?
Yeah. So my understanding, producers are sometimes helping write songs, especially like in hip hop. It's a big lift, and they might be doing the whole underlying music bed, and then a lot of the time they're getting a songwriting credit because of that. And then sometimes they really didn't, and it's just a grab. But that can be a part of a producer agreement. There can also be a producer agreement, like I'm used to seeing them from the side of a record label. So it's a producer agreement signed, the artist is hiring the producer. Even if the artist is signed to a big label like Republic, they are the person who hires the producer. They give a fraction of, or think of it like this, if the artist is getting a 16% royalty from a label, then they will give points to the producer. They'll say, okay, you're gonna get 3%, and that's gonna deduct their 16%. So really, now the artist gets 13%, the producer gets 3%. But you want that producer agreement because it lays out like, what rights does the producer have? What are they gonna get paid? Are they gonna get an advance payment up front plus a royalty? So you really want this. A lot of the time on the lower scale, it might just be a flat fee. Like you might just be paying a producer a certain amount of money per track, but you still want an agreement for the same reason you wanted the split sheets, for the same reason that you want the work for hire, because you want to know in writing who owns what, and you ideally don't want to give up anything that you don't know that you're giving up.
On an even more basic level, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of recently is either a payment dispute or a creative dispute between a solo musician and their producer, where the producer then threatens to destroy the recordings or actually withholds the recordings until a certain condition is met, and there is no agreement saying when who the files belong to, even if they're unfinished, and who has the authority to destroy them or sell them or release them. We had another one recently where someone released something without authorization, and it was a handshake agreement. So these are all things. Have you seen anything?
Well, you're just really touching on the importance of having a contract in place before you go into a studio with a producer, because there's so many issues, there's so many things to address in a contract like that. So just talking about the songwriting side of it, one of the many things you want to address in a producer agreement is what happens if the producer actually does contribute something to a song, and at what point does he become a co-owner of the song or a co-writer of the song? If we're representing the artist, who also is the songwriter often, we certainly want control over that process, and we want clarity as to when and how and if the producer is going to be able to claim any co-writer credit. We want all that settled up front as best as possible. Of course, musicians, that's hard to do sometimes, because musicians and producers and people are all in the studio working together, and everybody's real happy and everybody likes each other, and they don't want to start They don't want to be confrontational. They don't want to have any friction. And so whenever we as lawyers start recommending, well, you do this, 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 and this to protect yourself, sometimes that's hard for musicians and creative people to do. So it's kind of a talent to develop the skills of how to address these issues diplomatically when you're in that environment. Because if you don't address it one way or another, you're going to end up with some producers and people who are working with you. What it may be the drummer that you hired to bring in for that session. It may be, we don't know who, but somebody is very likely going to claim that some part of that song was original with them. They contributed to it, and they think you're entitled to a songwriter credit. So that's something that has to be thought about before when you go in. And so that's one thing we try to address in the producer agreement as a procedure or a process, and we want the artist to be in control of that, especially if the artist is hiring the producer, which is often the case. So, and then often around here, it's the producer might own the studio and that you're working in. And so we could sit here and talk a long time about producer contracts. I don't know how far you want to go into that.
I don't know what time we're stopping since we didn't start on time. Okay. Is this helpful? Do you want us to talk more about producer agreements? Okay. So same question regarding the producers agreements. If someone comes into your clinic and just says, I want this looked over real quick, are there any red flags? Or is there anything missing? What do you scan for?
In a producer agreement?
Yes.
We're talking about?
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, of course, there's the basic stuff, like what are you paying the producer for the use of the studio? What are you paying for his time? Is there any kind of fee set for the producer, often on a per track basis? In other words, you want to work out a budget, and so we're looking. If I'm looking at somebody brings a producer agreement in here, I'm looking to see how they've addressed all these issues that are pretty commonly that are going to come up in the course of that production process. And so that's the money being paid, the time frame for doing it, what the producer is going to deliver at the end of the day. What is the scope of their assignment? Are they just simply working as a producer, or are they doing the mix, or are they doing the mastering, or what are they delivering specifically? That's going to need to be addressed. And then sometimes producers are often interested in a royalty participation if the record is successful. So you want to get into the royalty calculations. But there's so many different levels to producer deals. Like you could have local here in Austin. You could have an artist that's hiring a studio and a producer to do something on a very with no particular expectations about where this is going, or you can go all the way to a deal like I think Jake's dealt with at major record labels, and so those deals can look very different. You want to talk about one of those?
Yeah, like even the royalties look different at the ground level versus once you get to a big label. Like I told you, a label, they're giving an artist a royalty, and the artist pays a bit of that royalty to a producer, usually in like points, and it looks like 3% or 4% if the artist gets 16% and the producer gets 4%. But really, in that case, the producer is getting 25% of what the artist is getting. And then usually, when you're not dealing with these massive labels, then if it's a royalty, it's like a percentage of the net proceeds, the percentage of the amount that the artist would actually get. And then a lot of the time, especially deals here in Austin, there might just not be a royalty. It might just be a flat fee. So these deals, they differ widely. I was talking to a producer who didn't know they just wanted, some contracts for either case, and you have to build in a lot, so the contract just gets wild. But
we've that's often the case. Like Jake was saying, it could just be you pay the producer X amount of dollars, flat fee, that's it. or if they really want a participation in future revenue, then you have to begin to think about how to structure it so that, okay, it's a flat fee now, but then what happens if the artist distributes himself, well then how do you calculate that royalty? Oh, well, what if the artist makes a deal? What if it moves on to a major label or another distributor and they have a whole completely different deal? So you got to be able to create a pathway here for the producer who wants to be a royalty participant to work with the artist at these different stages as the record moves along from one type of distribution to another, and it does it's pretty complicated because especially if you get into the royalty calculations where you get up to the level where you're dealing with a producer that's going to be commanding 4 or 5% royalty based on the per dealer price, and you get into a producer who's wanting to get paid from record one if he after the recording costs are recouped. I mean, you get into very complicated terms.
So shifting to a different type of music, another thing that we're seeing a lot of issues arise from is pre-recorded beats, producers who use pre-recorded beats. Both people wanting to sell those beats and people wanting to use those beats. Have you encountered anything, legal issues around ownership of the beats, authorship of the beats, use of the beats?
I can tell you about a situation that we dealt with not too long ago, and that is this is one of the more successful ventures that I've seen in a long time, and that is so this artist he had a track that blew up on TikTok, and it was huge, and but he put it out himself, and he had hired a local producer, not here in Austin, somewhere else. He'd hired this local producer came up with some beats, and he paid that producer some small amount of money, and they signed a kind of a junky little contract, and put out his own record, and it just took off on TikTok, and to the point where a major label came around wanting to pick it up, and so at that point they went. That's whenever we got involved, and so then it's a matter of looking at his contracts and realizing that this little contract that he had for these beats was not really very good, and so there was a lot of discussion about, well, what are we going to do with this producer and this deal, because it's got these somebody else's work in there in this contract, how is it going to impact the deal with a major label? And so their legal department took a look at it, and at the end of the day, we went back and paid the producer a chunk of money, and just basically bought him out in order to clear it up and make sure that the client had the rights to the recording so that he could make the deal with the major label. And then that turned into a very good deal. And then another company came along. You may have heard of it, Duetti. They came along and bought the track for an enormous amount of money. So everything played out okay, but there was this little hiccup in there with this producer deal that had created these beats for the track.
So Jake had mentioned that having all of these contracts in place is one of the necessary conditions for finalizing a record deal. In this day and age, what can musicians expect to see from a record deal?
Yes, it totally depends on the label and the artist. So an indie label deal for a small artist is not going to look the same as Mike's deal for this one artist who then gets signed by a major after having a song that blows up. But what you are looking at is there going to be an advance? So indie deals as well, like indie labels will sometimes give an advance if the artist is to a certain stature or if it's just their practice, and that advance can vary pretty widely. I've seen like indie labels give $30,000 advances, and I've seen major labels give $1 million advances. So it's like it could be anywhere, but one of the things that people are often thinking about, an advance is an artist gets a royalty in their label deal, and the advance is essentially a prepayment of that royalty, and then the artist won't get paid anything else until their royalty equals what it would have equals that number of the advance. So if they get a $30,000 advance and they have, a 10% royalty, once the album has earned, let's say enough money that 10% of it is $30,000, then they've recouped the advance. But you get that $30,000 up front. It's not a loan. You do not have to pay it back. There are times that you might want to pay it back to get out of a deal, but that's a big misconception I see, that people are like, an advance is basically a loan. You're in debt to the record company. It's like, but if you default on a loan and you don't pay it back, you're screwed. And if you don't, earn back an advance, then, it's not great because you didn't make the money that maybe the record company wanted you to make, but you still got $30,000 in your pocket.
Jake, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Whenever you were with Warner's, how do they categorize different types of acts? I mean, do they? I mean, like in your office as in business affairs and legal, are you handling only certain types of deals, or is it kind of categorized out, or does all kinds of deals cross your desk?
Yeah, so when I was working at the majors, it was every type of deal comes across your desk. The deals, there's no category. I mean, we call it a developing artist, somebody kind of towards the bottom who doesn't have as many streams, and then obviously it goes all the way to a superstar. But the real way that these big labels are doing it is they have a P&L sheet, and they say, this is how much we're projecting that this could make based on their past sales, and based on that, the deal starts to vary pretty, it can vary a lot. And then a lot of the time, what it used to be in the industry, I think, is that these big labels, and maybe even small ones, basically nobody was owning the rights to their sound recordings. And today, that is not exactly the case, probably because with the advent of social media and artists are able to sometimes blow up on their own without the help of a record label, then they can go into a negotiation with a little bit more leverage. And it's really, you don't need as much leverage as you might think to get one of these deals where the artist retains their sound recording copyright and they're just effectively licensing it to the major labels.
Well, that's what we saw with the TikTok guy.
Right.
There was a 3-year distribution deal, and which played out pretty well for him. And it was but he had the leverage of having a hit going on there.
Right, and I would say now you don't have to have a hit, but if you have just some heat, you're getting big, people know your name, you're selling out a few shows, it's not as big as you might think to just get a license deal anymore, because it used to just be that people would come into record labels with no leverage at all because there was no way to get your music heard unless you were on the radio and there were only so many stations.
So how did you think it was determined as to whether or not an artist what label the artist would fit with best?
So it's generally so each label has what's called an A&R person, and that stands for artist and repertoire, which doesn't mean anything, but that person is the one who goes out and in some way finds an artist and says, oh, I think this would be good for our label, and if we sign them and they do really well, then I'm going to get a big fat bonus at the end. And then if you're an artist, the best case scenario is you have a few labels coming after you, and then they're going to have to pitch you, and you go with whichever one you think makes the most sense, whichever has the best pitch. Maybe you're looking at the other artists who are with them, and it's just kind of, you feel it out, and it ideally is in the artist's court. Even if you only have one label come to you, you don't have to take the deal if it's a bad deal.
Like these major labels now, they have these sub-labels that are like for the distribution deal we're talking about. And is the same legal department handling all those deals for those different sub-labels?
Sort of. Like as I said, I worked for the East Coast labels for Universal Music Group, so I was handling Republic, Island, and Def Jam, and that's not all the Universal Music Group labels. Like they have a West Coast, but generally there was a shared services. So if you were negotiating a deal with Island and Republic, which I don't even know if you can do that anymore technically, but it'd be the same lawyer probably.
So, you mentioned that there are people blowing up on their own now and monetizing through social media. Is having a record deal, why is it still desirable?
You know what? I would say it totally depends. You should hear out the pitch, because in some instances, it's not desirable. Like, it might not make sense for every artist, and for other artists, it might. Like, I've heard people talk that a record label is really good once you already have some success and you're just looking like, I need to make the next leap. I need, an injection of cash, or I need like a marketing and promotion team who is focused on doing this, who knows how to pull all the right levers. Obviously, the more leverage you have going in, the better deal you're going to get. And then in some instances, the record label can push you to the next label. Like, who's the global superstar who's just not signed in any way to a label? There aren't many of them, but there are plenty of, I would say, middle-class acts who don't need a label, can distribute themselves, or can just use a smaller distributor, or they're just not using a label, or a label as you would think of it.
To what extent were you seeing 360 deals when you were with the labels?
Yeah, they're definitely still around, and a 360 deal is where an artist signs with a record label and they make all these, they're getting paid a certain amount for the sound recording, but then the label also wants to participate a bit in sound recording.
Publishing, merch, and everything, right?
Right. So those are negotiable. They definitely still exist. Like, I don't think I ever did one without it.
How was that determined internally? How was it determined whether or not this one is right for a 360 deal and this one should be something different?
How big is the artist? Like,
how much money they're putting out? How much the advance is?
No, I mean, like, if it's a huge artist that the label really wants, then they're gonna have more leverage, and they can be essentially give them the finger and be like, maybe you get a piece of something, but I can decide what that is. You can get a piece of something that you actually provided, and then if it's a smaller artist, and they're like, this is the biggest deal we're ever gonna get. Like, we're not that big, and the label's offering us $200,000, and they're gonna take a piece of everything, then they might just say, all right, we know what we're getting ourselves into, but we'll do it anyway.
So we're past 6 now. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is resources, how to find an attorney, how to get an attorney, what kind of attorney you should hire. There are, I would say the best way to find an attorney is a referral. If you have friends, people in the community, they will recommend attorneys that they've worked with. They will, steer you away from people they might not have a good experience with. That is the number one best way, I think, to find an attorney, is to find someone you trust, similar career trajectory, and get a referral. The Texas Music Office also has a directory with attorneys listed. There's the State Bar of Texas Lawyer Referral Service, which in Austin we also have a nonprofit called the Lawyer Referral Service of Central Texas. They're also a good resource. And there are nonprofits. TELA, for example, we cover almost everything that we talked about today in our services. The only thing we don't handle is litigation. So if you need to sue somebody, we can't do that. Do either of you litigate?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, again, ideally, entertainment law is transactional. So in those situations, you are kind of stuck. But the best time
if you needed to litigate, like if I was working with somebody and it got to the point that we need to go to litigation, like there are people that I would refer
we
to.
all know somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works in my office too. If we can take problems up to the point of litigation. We try to work out and solutions before it goes that far, because I can assure you, you do not want to get involved in litigation if you can avoid it, because it's just so damned expensive. And so we try to find solutions, and but we know attorneys that do litigate and who are familiar with copyright and those kinds of issues. But I also wanted to add the State Bar of Texas has the Entertainment and Sports Law section, and those members of that section, there are a number of those members who do entertainment law in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin primarily. And so there is a directory there if you go to the State Bar website.
Yeah, if you email Tella, we will direct you to where you are most likely to find an attorney. We are not allowed to make referrals for hire. We can only refer free services. So, but we can figure out who you need, even if it's something we don't cover. Anything else to add to that about how to find an attorney?
Just, I would say, do your research, make sure that they work in the music industry, and that's kind of all. Yeah, if you can, find somebody who's worked with them. Just ask other artists that you like, who you think have worked with attorneys, like who they're working with and how they feel about them. And I think that's always probably going to serve you the best.
And so, the other thing to be aware of is that, you as the client have the right to choose the attorney. So, when you go and speak to the attorney, the most important thing is that you hire someone that you trust, right? I have worked in many different areas of public interest law. I've worked primarily in domestic violence, actually, but I've always been in poverty law. So I have always worked with a clientele that is very distrustful. Artists are the most distrustful group I've ever worked with out of all of the people that I've worked with. I understand where it comes from. Any group that isn't, I guess, in any way marginalized, you're always going to see the distrust there. So the most important thing is that you trust your attorney, because otherwise you're going to be paying them money, and then you're not going to follow their advice, and then you're going to probably end up the creek anyway and having to hire another attorney to fix whatever got messed up. That's the most frequent thing that we see. So just be aware that you might have to, just like finding a therapist, finding a spouse, you might have to interview a couple people before you find the right match, and that's totally okay. Don't assume that the person you're talking to knows exactly what they're talking about and is the perfect person for you just because they're expensive or because this other person used them. The most important thing is that you go with your gut and that you're going to listen to what this person tells you. So even if they do know what they're talking about, if you don't trust them, it's useless. So that's the most important thing, I would think. And if y'all don't have anything to add, let's open it up to questions. Sure. Yeah, or anything that you want us to talk more about. I'm really shocked that so many people stayed, and thank you for staying with us.
Any questions? Yep. Oh, Meg.
Thank you, guys. If you're an independent artist looking to put together a work for hire producer contract, is it okay to find templates? Are there resources online for us to put those together ourselves, or do you always recommend that we maybe draft something and have it reviewed by an entertainment lawyer? Is it something we can or should do ourselves? How do we?
So I'm just going to give an overview real quick. So that's a great question, because one of the most common things that lawyers see in general in every field is requests to fix things that people have gotten online. And common problems are that they got it from somewhere that didn't address the state, the laws of the state that they're in. What are the common problems? You have to really look at things. One of the things that a lawyer does is they look at things in totality, right? Like, you can't just cut and paste clauses because they might interfere with each other. So you have to look at the totality of the document. Additionally, free advice is worth exactly what you paid for it free, right? The thing that I want people to understand about attorneys is that it's not that we know more than you necessarily, or know more than the guy who's been in the business for 60 years or whatever. It's that we have licenses and we carry the liability of those licenses. We operate under a disciplinary authority. So if we mess something up, we're liable. If you mess something up by relying on some guy you trust, you're liable. Basically you have no recourse. So because of that, attorneys are much more careful. And you have kind of a safety net, right? Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, like, if you don't fully understand an agreement, like the nuts and bolts and everything together, then it shouldn't be something that you're signing or giving to somebody, because you probably in this instance need a work for hire agreement is like one page. It's about as simple as an agreement can be, and it's worthwhile to have an attorney give you a template or something when they understand what your situation is, so that you are covering yourself for exactly what you need.
Yeah, you'll find a lot of information about producer agreements online. There's just a ton of information there, and you can find a lot of stuff. And so, but I can't advise you to just deal with that on your own if you're not an attorney. But I would say if you want to put something together, put it together as best you can, and find somebody that knows what those deals look like to check out what you do.
Okay, thank you.
And so what are the resources for an attorney just to review a contract? What are some resources for an artist to access someone to look over a contract? How would that look?
I mean, I think you just have to hire.
You just have to find a lawyer, find a music lawyer to look at it.
Okay. Additionally, there are clinics. UT does a clinic every now and then. If you come to Tella, we will look at your contracts for the year of your membership for free. Don't be afraid to just call an attorney's office and just say, I have this contract that needs to be looked at. Very simple. It's not a big production.
And also, shameless plug, if you go onto Instagram and you just look up Jake DeVito's PLLC, I do a bunch of videos where I try to explain as many concepts as I can in ideally under a minute. And I think that they're useful, and it obviously helps me if I have people following it. And so it's there for you if you want to just kind of scroll through it and see what's going on, what I'm talking about.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for coming here with us. I realize it's kind of a different bit of law, but I think applicable. When would you say it's worth the money to go trademark band names or logos and stuff like that? Because, as musicians, it's not like we have a lot of money to, like a normal person starting a business to, well, not that they all have money, but when would you say is a good time to go, like, all right, you've kind of got to this thing, it's worth making sure that you have your stuff trademarked, your name, so somebody can't go steal it or take it or use it otherwise?
Well, oftentimes the name of the band is the most valuable thing they have, because you can change out most of the members of the band, and as long as they've got the name, if they establish the brand as something that enough of the public recognizes, it can be very valuable. You see bands travel, on tour, 50 years later. So the time to file your trademark registration is whenever you've decided you're going to invest a lot of time and money in being a band using this brand, because that's your brand. And so if you want to protect it, register it. You can register at the state level, and you can register at the federal level. And there's a lot that goes along with that, but it's not that terribly expensive. And you can also run a check at the federal level to see if anybody else is already using it, if there's a conflict. And so, the minute you think you're going to start investing time and money in that brand, then you want to protect it. And
So
you want to secure it.
the website for doing a trademark search, if you just Google TESS trademark search, you will end up at the electronic search system for the USPTO, which is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So if you want to find out if your band name is registered, that's where you do it.
Yeah, you should check that out because you don't want to be investing in a brand or a name that somebody else is already using that they're going to just try to come around and shut you down later.
Or try to license to you. We've had people try to squat on names. This happened with a couple film festivals. We've had people try to trademark a name that was already in use to license it later, all sorts of weird stuff. But I say it's always worth it. It's not expensive, and it can depend on the complexity of your mark and how, the weirder it is, more likely it's going to be easy enough for you to trademark on your own or to register a trademark on your own. But if it's something very common, it's going to be, you'll probably need an attorney's help.
You can also register an intent to use if you just have a name that you are thinking about using, and if you really want to try to protect that, you do a search, and then if it's available, then you can file an intent to use, and that's good for, you can roll that out for about 3 years before you have to actually prove up use of the name.
Other questions? Yep. Oh.
So, what are some of the contracts that any musician needs to have in their back pocket? Like producer agreements, what is the bundle that I need to have in my folder so I'm ready?
It depends what kind of musician you are. I mean, a hip-hop musician will have a very different kind of thing than a band leader, right? But are there any that are common?
Like
Well,
singer,
it kinda
songwriter
depends-
type of.
It depends on what you're doing and what kind of work you're doing and what your primary activity is. If you're a for example, you might be a songwriter and might be wanting to know about songwriter agreements, or you might be going into the studio with some friends to make a recording, and you're going to need an agreement amongst the people that you're bringing in. So it just depends on what you're doing.
I would say that anytime you work with other people, you will need some sort of agreement. So you need to think about the situations in which you are working with other people. If you are selling your work, most likely the person purchasing it will have the agreement. And in that case, you would need an attorney to review it or possibly help you negotiate it. But if you are hiring people or collaborating with people, that's when you would be responsible for providing the agreement, most likely. And those are the agreements that you would need.
Yeah, I mean, going back, it's like split sheets and work for hires are going to come up a lot if you're hiring people to record or you're writing with other people. A producer agreement will probably come from the producer, but this is not an exhaustive list, and it can really depend on your situation. But I would say work for hires and split sheets probably come up the most often because you need one for every person who is going to be recording with you or writing with you.
Any other questions?
Well, and one more shameless plug. If you follow us at ATX Musicians, oftentimes we'll repost Jake's videos. Again, Tala has a open legal clinic once a month, I believe, Angela? Is it
Quarterly?
quarterly?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then also, I don't know how many musician asses I've saved when somebody kind of calls me and they're like, hey, I got a contract. I need to look at this right away. I need to figure out what's going on. And I'll send them over to Mike and Gwen. They host the free legal clinic from 3 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday, I believe. So if you email Mike at miketollison.com or Gwen at miketollison.com, they're going to be able to help you every week with that legal clinic. Anything else you guys want to add today? Keep getting under the speaker. Yeah. Is that it?
Sorry?
Anything else you guys want to add today? Yeah.
Happy to answer questions either now or afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
late. Everyone's hungry, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
We'll
think
be
so.
around.
Yeah. It's been a long day. It's been a great day. Let's give a big round of applause. Angela Lee, Jake Davidowitz, and the GOAT of Austin music, Mike Tollison. And that's it. Again, we are Austin, Texas Musicians Nonprofit. We're going to be here. We're going to try to do these panels more often. And you want to tell them about Night Shift one more time?
Sure. In case you didn't know, the first Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m., I believe? 7 p.m. here, right in this very room. We do Night Shift. We did do open mic last month. It was a huge success. We will be implementing some rules for open mic so it doesn't turn into a big Broadway ta-da. We want to keep it humble and tiny and gracious. So don't go enlisting all of your best metal player band members to come and play. Yeah, we're keeping it singer-songwriter. And then the third Tuesday of every month is Harmony Sisters. And this month, which is tomorrow night, 6 p.m., around the corner at Vinyl Beauty Bar.
And all the other Tuesdays will be the Hideaway Jam. Yeah. So y'all hang out. Yeah, starting tonight. So y'all hang out with us. Again, thank you to all our panelists. Let's party.
And also, can we make some noise for Pat, please? Pat? Yeah. And Jeremy, our sound guy. Woo!